Well, the Conservatives underneath Gavin Williamson are well and truly screwing up education. But of course, this doesn't just go to our current Conservative government. This goes all the way back to when they first got in with the Lib Dems, making very systematic and direct cuts to Department of Education and facilities which would help, again, disadvantaged young children get ahead in life and in education. And as I've often said, education is one of the best ways to get out of poverty. But, of course, our government isn't really committed to such things because, like we've said before, if they were, they would actually be spending money. Like I say, the amount that they've given so far amounts to £100 per child, which quite frankly just is not enough when you see other countries, such as the Netherlands, giving over at least £2,500 per child, which is what we really need. And they've already been accused of this. So continually, the government continues to screw up education and that entire generation's chance at, getting a decent life or even escaping the trap of poverty. But again, poverty itself is something a different matter that we need to tackle. And again, the Conservatives haven't made that situation any better. So jumping on into our article then, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page as well as one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support me that way. So, this comes from The Guardian. The title is Parents Angry at Shifting Government COVID Messages, Say School Leaders. So, parents are angry and confused by the government's own shifting messages over how the schools will deal with COVID outbreaks among pupils. And according to head teachers, leaders who says they are exhausted and staff are unlikely to get a break over the summer. Paul Whiteman, the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, has said that comments by MPs and special advisors mean teachers were being blamed for the huge rise in pupils in England having to self-isolate, while other ministers dangled the prospect of isolation rules being scrapped. The debate is creating confusion and friction at the school gates. Parents are anticipating that these changes are going to come in and make things easier for them, and that their patience is wearing thin, and that the government hasn't followed through, said Whiteman. Parents can't understand why bubbles are being burst after positive tests and why children are being sent home to self-isolate, and our members are getting the blame for that, when all they do is follow the guidelines and rules that are in place, not accepting what's coming over the hill. Whiteman said that the sharp rise in school COVID outbreaks after the official figures showed that 300,000 pupils in England this week were isolating at home, and was compounding the fact that the heavy workload of head teachers was likely to continue well into August. And school leaders will be expected to oversee test and trace for pupils infected a week in and after the end of term, while those in secondary schools will need to administer teacher-assisted A-levels and GCSE next month. That includes the appeals process over grades, which will need to be done urgently for students applying to university or sixth form college places. But before the new school year in September, heads may have to prepare for further disruption among the last remaining unvaccinated age group. But despite the hints dropped by Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, the government has not yet announced plans for September. You'd think that the government would be ahead of this, but they're not. And that's what's so shocking. The fact that we've been in this situation and yet there is still no long-term plan of how to deal with COVID in schools. And yet at the moment, we are running huge risks with COVID in schools, both primary and secondary. Huge risks. Because if we see a mutation, we could be back to square one. Or we could get another mutation, which now affects children even more, which would even be more worrying. And it's not, remember, this doesn't just affect children, this affects their parents as well, because the likelihood is, if that child gets infected, then that could infect maybe one of the parents, and one of their parents could maybe go to work, that entire workplace gets infected, and so on and so on. Like I say, none of this could be good, because even if you've got your vaccine, doesn't make you immune, means you can still get it, but you won't get it as bad, but you can still pass it on. And of course, the worrying thing, as we've said before, what if we get a mutation? And then we're right back to square one. And I mean right back to square one. So the government screwing up education this much, I think, will be a major issue at the next general election. Anyway, he continues. We are only a fortnight from the end of term in most schools. So if we have to make arrangements, for example, for on-site testing, then we need to do that now, Whitman said. If we are going to have to continue to live in bubbles, we need to be able to arrange those bubbles and get the timetables right. There's also testing needed before children come back. Then we are going to have to arrange a staggering starts in at least secondary schools. So the pressure on schools isn't really abating, and the government isn't doing anything in the last 2 weeks of term to actually help. Come September, we're going to have a workforce that has been under pressure even over the summer. Whitman's views were echoed by George Barton, the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, who wrote in the TSA that the government had presided over a week of unhelpful and confusing sniping, adding it marked another squalid low point in the trust and confidence the education sector now has in the government. Wipton and Bartman, the National Education Union, have also written to Williamson in protest at the lack of guidance for the next school year, accusing the government of treating school leaders with what is quite frankly starting to feel like contempt. The letter states, "We do not accept that schools and colleges should be exempt on an indefinite basis to continue to undertake public health duties, to the detriment of our members' health and well-being, and the capacity to focus on providing the high-quality education that children and young people desperately need." So, why aren't schools getting any attention? Well, I'll tell you one quite simply. Because then, if schools have to lock down or maybe take special measures, then that means that the parents can't go to work, which then maybe means that, other things will happen. And obviously this will affect the economy, this will affect them. And of course, this might mean that they might not vote Tory at the next election. So of course, this is a big worry. And this is no more than an actual political ploy to keep the schools open, to try and keep parents happy, when they are themselves putting schools, school children, and even the teachers at risk. And as I've said before, we have praised the work of nurses and social workers so much during the pandemic, which was right, but we have not praised teachers enough, because they are another group of people who have been on the front lines helping out many times to protect our children, and them themselves getting COVID not once but twice. And again, I know a couple of teachers who have had COVID, and not once but twice. Some are suffering the effects of long COVID, which could have other consequences down the road. But like I say, this is our government who doesn't really care for long-term planning. They are only mattering about short-term stuff. If they can keep the schools open, well, it's a great short-term win, but not really so much in the long term of public health planning. Like I say, things could go very bad and very wrong very quickly if this all goes, well, a bit peaked on. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.